Okay, this is, we're having a session for our Synod SAMs of the Northwest Synod of Wisconsin on justice issues. And we have Pastor Sarah Bishop, who is on the Synod staff specifically for that purpose. So Sarah is going to lead us this evening.
Thanks, Bob. I am going to be sharing my screen tonight. So I am also going to turn off my camera so I'm not distracted. I'd like to start by letting you know that we are going to be discussing land acknowledgement in, this is not a how-to, this is a why, because churches are going to be asking why. Why should we do a land acknowledgement? This is to try to give you the tools to be able to help them navigate that. We're going to start with a check-in. Some ground rules. As always, we will use respective language. Kindness is of utmost importance to yourself and others. We don't currently have any survivors of the Indian schools present or any forced adoptees, but that is something that you should be aware of. Our synod is surrounded, not just on, but also surrounded by people who are Indian school survivors or forced adoptees, and they may be in our congregations. So be aware of that when you're talking about this subject. If we need to stop, ask to stop. You can do so out loud. You can do so privately in a chat to me. It doesn't matter because we will stop and we will just take a moment. And if you give me an issue that we need to address, I will address it. Please speak on behalf of yourself only. If you're not speaking, please listen wholeheartedly. One of the ways I challenge people to listen is that if you are able to substitute a verb as you're listening, you are listening well because you're paying attention. This material can be very divisive, and it is challenging, especially for congregations that are primarily white, which the Northwest Synod of Wisconsin has 0.01% diversity. Our congregations are primarily white. Honestly, I think my daughter, my dad, and I, and Lita represent quite a lot of the diversity. But one of the diversities you will find are our Indigenous neighbors. They're in a lot of the churches that I have attended. And this is something that we need to navigate together, guided by the Spirit, and we will do it mindfully and compassionately. My last rule for my presentations is to assume best intentions. If somebody doesn't word something well, or if they're a little clumsy in asking a question or making a comment, assume best intentions. This will help us go forward when we are dealing with challenging subjects. I'm going to begin with a small centering prayer. Creator, we give you thanks for all that you are and all that you bring to us within your creation. In Jesus, you place the gospel in the center of the sacred circle through which all creation is related. Amen.
Amen.
And a reading from Romans 13. Owe no one anything except to love one another, for the one who loves another has fulfilled the law. The commandments, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not murder, you shall not steal, you shall not covet, and any other commandment are summed up in this word: love your neighbor as yourself. Love does no wrong to a neighbor, therefore love is fulfilling the law. We did introductions, but I would, so don't answer the second question. We've got those. You can answer the second question if you like. But if anybody would like to volunteer, and I'm specifically not going to volunteer because it will come up a little bit later, but where are your ancestors from? And this is different from asking, what's your heritage, or how do you culturally identify? Where are your ancestors from?
This is Jill. Half of my relations come from a country that no longer exists. Was called Pomerania. It's now part of Poland and Germany on the Baltic Sea. And then the other part of my family hails from Norway, a northern village just south of the Arctic Circle.
Oh, that's wonderful. I lived in Estonia, Jill, and I have a great story about Pomerania. Our little Pomeranian dog passed away, and my husband said we should go to Pomerania to catch one. And I said, what do you mean catch one? And he says, Pomerania, where the Pomeranians are. So they don't run wild in the forest, honey. I can't go catch them. Would anyone else like to volunteer where your ancestors are from? And Jill, you might be the first I've heard mention Pomerania.
Well, interestingly enough, that my father's parents came from Stettin, which when they came here was part of Germany, but that part of Europe is now part of Poland.
Yep.
Not Germany anymore. My maternal side from my grandmother is some combination of Welsh, Irish, and Scottish, and included Roger Williams. So she was a Williams.
And that's a lovely illustration about how borders flex and breathe. Anyone else?
Family side, my father's side is from England, and they migrated here in 1638. And on my mother's side, they're Bohemian in Finnish. So how's that for a combination?
That's a wonderful combination. I love it. Do you know if they came all the way to Wisconsin in the 1600s?
No, they were in just outside of in Massachusetts, just outside of Boston.
Okay, very
They
good.
migrated up into upper New York. And around 1850, they migrated down by Ripon.
Yeah, that was a big draw. It was a helpful place to start for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
Can I have just one more?
That's Luke, and I think most of mine are from Norway. I know specifically some are from Telemark, the district of Telemark, Norway. And that was the region where during World War II, where the Norwegian resistance had sabotaged the hydroelectric plant that was producing heavy water that the Nazis were using for their atomic bomb program.
Yeah, that's an amazing story. Didn't they just recently do the underwater archaeology to find that boat?
Yeah, I think they did. They had to sink that ferry. I think they did find it.
Yeah, that it is a fascinating history. And I've been to Telemark. Beautiful, beautiful country. So one of the reasons that I ask you to name where your ancestors are from, as opposed to identifying a heritage, is that when you are asked to tick off, what's your heritage, how do you culturally identify, it's usually a box. But when you think about your ancestors, you have to think about relationships. Relationships are going to be very important in this land acknowledgement discussion. So essentially, we're going to discuss 4 things. When does history begin? The ELCA's declaration to American Indian and Alaska Native people. Why we as individual congregations, not just individuals, but also individual congregations, why should we adopt the practice of land acknowledgement? And then that wide open, what does the future look like? And particularly, how does land acknowledgement fit into that? It won't be as simple as this, but this is essentially the course we're going to try to navigate. The purpose is not to create a land acknowledgement statement. This is the beginning of a truth and healing process that hopefully, with work and effort within the congregation, will lead to reconciliation and will lead to a land acknowledgement statement. It is a lot like reconciling in Christ. There is a lot of internal work to be done to get to the statement, and then there's the future going forward with the statement. These words from Chief Dr. Robert Joseph are also said in another way that is probably more recognizable in this group. If you prefer these words instead of Chief Dr. Robert Joseph, this is just a very short, quickly Googled list of verses that tie directly to reconciliation between peoples. Land acknowledgement and the relationships that result are God's work. This is what we are called to do. So a very brief check-in that I'm wondering if anybody has that sort of tightness in the oh no part of either their chest or their temples usually. If not,
No.
we're ready to go forward. Okay. So looking at me, or in this case, looking at my picture, you might be able to make some assumptions. Maybe not. You could have assumed, but correctly, that I am a woman. You can't tell if I'm married or not, but I am, or if I have children, which I do. But what claims of ancestry might you make from just looking at me? Now, Bob, you don't get to answer. Hey, you either, Lyle. What heritage might you claim from me? Now I realize you're all being very, very polite by not wanting
Actually,
to.
I never saw your picture, so I don't know what you look like.
Oh, if you scroll to the bottom of your pop out for who is here, you can see a little picture that my daughter drew for me.
Oh, very cute.
So just
You
for
have a perfect Midwest accent. So, yeah.
Well, that's true. That is very true. So one of the things that we cannot tell by looking at people, we can't tell their heritage. We think we can, but we cannot tell their heritage. I'm Mexican American. You can't tell from looking at me if I'm educated, if I'm well off, if I'm a veteran, if I have European ancestry, which I do, or what other kinds of ancestry I do have. I'm a very quick lesson in the assumptions we make from looking, or as Jill said, listening. If I was speaking Russian, people tend to think that I come from St. Petersburg as opposed to Moscow. And that has to do with the fact that how one of my teachers taught me. My Spanish, much to my father's annoyance, is much more Castilian from Spain than it is Mexican from Mexico. That's because I learned it in a book, not at home. The truth and reconciliation process is something that we're following behind. Australia and Canada are in the process of truth and reconciliation. We are not there yet. We are still in the truth and healing part of the process. Canada has normalized land acknowledgements for more than 20 years. In Australia, when you turn on the radio, you'll hear this is ABC radio coming to you from Garigoland. Or when we started church services, we would always have that as part of our church service. And if you invite me to come and preach, you will hear me say it at every service that I go to. Australia has 11 representatives in Parliament who identify as Indigenous Aboriginal. We have 1. But now Australia is also looking at an Indigenous Aboriginal seat for every single tribe. And the reason I point this out is not to say that we're behind or that we're doing it wrong or that we're doing it differently, because every place that has been colonized is doing it differently. But primarily because we are not alone. All of these questions that we are going to ask tonight have been asked before. People have gone this way before us, and they've left us a map. Now, one question that you are going to be asked by your congregation is, why does it matter who was here before Europeans arrived. And I am curious to hear what you think, how you would answer that now. Why does it matter?
It
Not how
matters.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just, it matters. It matters significantly because the history has been kept from us deliberately. All of the, like, I never knew what the dam that was built in winter, I never knew what that was about. I never knew, and that information has been kept. And when you start talking about that history, then you start acknowledging that, yeah, boy, there's a lot that happened here that was wrong, just wrong. And it's time. It's past time that we talk about it. But first we have to talk about all that information that's been kept.
Yeah, that's the truth part of the truth and healing. Part of the healing is for ourselves. Anyone else?
Something like 100 million natives were slaughtered in the process.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Most of our churches are built on stolen land, especially if they're more than 100 years old. That's a hard thing for us to wrap our brains around, because what happens is we feel guilt and we feel shame. And that is not the purpose of a land acknowledgement. A land acknowledgement is about truth and healing. Guilt and shame might be something that we have to confess and be forgiven for. Not because we have guilt or we have shame, but because we are confessing for our ancestors. Native land acknowledgement is a way of saying we see you, we hear you, and we confess the sin that happened to you. Don't know why it's not going forward. There we go. So a couple thoughts about time. And this will help you in your conversations with your congregations. History did not begin with us. There is physical evidence of human behavior on Turtle Island, which is what the Indigenous Americans call the Americas, from 16,000 years ago. That would be super long time. That would be a very, very long time ago. In 2022, a 3,000-year-old canoe was pulled out of Lake Mendota, Wisconsin. 977 years before Christ, someone pulled their trading canoe into the mud that was too soft. And when they came back, it had sunk into the mud. And they were wealthy enough that they didn't have to try to get it. There were 40 million Indigenous Americans in the Western Hemisphere in 1491. Trading goods traveled across the entire two continents, North and South Central America. There was a common recognized trading language that has been found from Canada to the US to Mexico and beyond. One of my most favorite facts here is democracy, as we recognize and practice it now, more resembles the Algonquins than Greek democracy. Even though we say our democracy comes from Athens, Athens was actually a bit of a anomaly in Greek politics. The Algonquin polity was probably taken by the French back to Europe, because one of their primary things is educated, open, civil discussion before a decision is made by the group, not by an individual. The ELCA wrote a declaration to American Indian and Alaska Native people. And this was 5 years after the Churchwild Assembly passed a mandate for them to do so. It is a document of confession. Confession is an integral part of our faith. We must have the ethics and the honesty to admit error, not as individuals, but as a denomination, and then accept the grace given in being forgiven, we must accept then the grace that we are forgiven and begin to right that wrong. The doctrine of discovery is a theological framework. It came from the Pope. It is an improper blend of church and state. It basically said that if a explorer arrived on a land and read the doctrine of discovery to the people in Latin, and they did not understand it, that it was terra nullis. They were allowed to approach it as if it were unpopulated, which is why you will not hear about the 41 million Native Americans in the country when they landed. What you will hear is that it was empty and savage. And that is why. It rationalized a great deal of injustice, including slavery, but that is an entirely different justice discussion. And it is something that many churches, including us, are repudiating. We are saying it is wrong. It set up a system of injustice, and it calls us to confession. This declaration was made for those people inside the ELCA. It was made for those people in the US, and it causes harm to communities, not just of immigrants, Native Americans and Alaskan Natives, but also to us. Because if you think about it, we have been living with a falsehood. We have been asked to believe, no, we haven't been asked to believe. We have been taught to believe a falsehood. The pledge of the declaration is that we will eliminate racism, we will develop relationships, and we will work to teach the truth. Land acknowledgement is a step towards this pledge. Every step we take is a baby step, and it is really frustrating because we want it fixed, and we want it fixed now, and that's just not how it works. Vance Black Fox, who's Cherokee, is the ELCA Director of Indigenous Ministries and Tribal Relations. He's written extensively on the practice of land acknowledgement. There is a number of links that you can get simply by going to the ELCA website and putting in Indigenous Ministries or Vance Black Fox. He has a lot of information available, and I encourage all of you to take his course, which he calls Indian 101. One of the things you're going to run into is I don't know what to call them, and that them is in quotes because that's immediately making an othering statement. Native Americans are just like us. Some Mexican Americans prefer to be called Hispanic, some prefer Latinx, some prefer Chicano. There's a number of different ways. The only way you're going to know what somebody wants to be called is to ask them. Yeah. And that's hard because that requires a level of humility. And while we are all very humble people, we're not very good at practicing humility. I'm going to add that the land acknowledgement process should look like the reconciling in Christ process. It's a lot of internal work as individuals, and it's a lot of internal work for a congregation. The process is much more about looking in the mirror than looking out at the ancestral lands that we've built our churches on. By acknowledging that history doesn't begin with us, we become part of a bigger story. We are no longer separate from it. We are no longer saying this is us and them. It shows how connected we are. And it shows that regardless of the past, we can learn and we can grow. Land acknowledgements are about building right relationship. Growth is our future. It doesn't look like it and it doesn't feel like it, but you have a lot of people for whom the love of God is right there outside of the communities that we live in. We just haven't invited them in. The question we should ask is who? With whom will we have these relationships? Will we remain in an insider club or will we be a good neighbor? And the thing about being a good neighbor is that you don't have to have more members. You just have to have relationships. Truth must come before healing, let alone before reconciliation. But the internal work required is going to help with many, many issues, not just the land acknowledgement issues. One of the first things you are going to be asked is, but I don't even know where we are. Well, here's a map. You can go to native-land.ca. Canadians, as I said, are a little further ahead of us on this. And this is mapped. There are a lot of places to find this. This is the most immediate one. It is the fastest one for pulling things up. And for instance, Eau Claire is right there. So when I acknowledge that I'm on Ojibwe, Dakota, and Menominee, which is also Ho-Chunk land. The Ho-Chunk and Menominee have adopted into each other now. On this map, they are separate because the tribes have asked to be acknowledged separately. Another question you're going to run into is, well, isn't this just performative? It's just a stupid sentence that you say at the beginning or you print in your bulletin. If we don't know why we're doing it, of course it's performative. Don't do it. But if you do the confessional internal work of empathy, it is not performative. Because the land acknowledgement is not the end point. The land acknowledgement is not where we're going. It's like the third step on the way. And the first two steps are steps we take sort of in the dark. People don't see us taking it, but we take it anyway. And our synod has started this. The fact that we have passed a resolution asking people to do a land acknowledgement was the first step in the dark. We can keep doing that. These are two things you will run into, and I would like to know if you have any questions on these two things or any other questions that you think naysayers are going to pop in.
Sarah, this is Tom.
Yes.
It's getting me to think, though, that we need to, when you talk about the right relationships, when we try to interact with our neighbors, that we need to do it based upon walking alongside them versus trying to, I'm not sure I can come up with the word, but trying to be right or whatever. But I just think it's important that we walk with them and have them help us, lead us on how to better be neighbors.
Yes, and I will tell people who I tell people often that empathy is going to be your biggest, the biggest arrow in your quiver. You are going to need to practice empathy in a way that is not comfortable for a dominant culture. Empathy in a way where you're not trying to be right, where you're not trying to win, where you're simply trying to be present and building relationship. And that's exactly what you just said, Tom. This is really about being respectful, treating somebody with dignity, and being present for them where they are. We're going to, when we had our winter theological, the Ho-Chunk came and did most of the day with us, including leading the worship and the blanket exercises and a lot of work. They had been asked many, many times to come to one of our winter theologicals. And they didn't. And at a later date, one of them said to me, well, we were waiting to see if you would keep asking. We were waiting to see if it was just one bishop's idea or if it would cross bishops. And we were waiting to see if you would try to impose your structure on us for that day, or if you would let us be who we are. That was humbling. 7 years they've been asked, and they had continued to wait to see if we were genuine. You may be asking, you may be being present, you may be waiting for a very long time, and that's okay. Do this to me. Yeah. The steps in truth and reconciliation are 5. The first step is for you to learn where you are. What happened in that place before Europeans came? Admitting that we chose not to recognize the cultures and the communities that were there before us. And sometimes even, sometimes the Swedes came before the Finns, or the Norwegians came before the Germans, and we don't mix those communities very often until we do, and we are. Step 2 is to identify where you are. As Native elders and ask your Native elders and culture bearers how they would like to see this practice take shape. I have one church that has very specifically asked for it not to take shape yet. They don't think the church is ready. These are Native Americans who attend this church on a regular basis. They are loved and included members of the community who have agency and feel as if they belong, and they have asked for us not to push it there yet. And we respect that. Step 3 is you need to ask, do you want, in your land acknowledgement, do you want to honor the people? Do you want to honor the elders? Do you want to honor the relationship to the land? Do you want to say something explicit? A lot of universities will mention how the land was occupied and unceded. The questions that you come up with as you articulate will help you determine how you want to proceed. Step 4 is to deliver. The acknowledgement, the land acknowledgement itself is 1 to 3 sentences. Mine is 1 sentence long. I come to you today from Ojibwe, Dakota, and Menominee land, and I honor their elders past, present, and emerging. That's it. Your acknowledgement, what you come up with as a congregation or a committee or as an individual, is a liturgy of awareness. It is Hesed. It is God's abiding love. It is stewardship. It is not performative. It is not just words. And then step 5 is to look beyond your land acknowledgement. What can you do to deepen the relationship? Can you offer space for native languages to be maintained? This is a huge challenge to their culture right now. After the Indian schools and after the removals, a lot of language was lost, and with language goes culture. How can you build up a space, either in your building or in your hearts, to move forward from truth to healing? And that will happen in conversation and in relationship. If your communities are interested in proceeding, reconciliationcanada.ca has a kitchen table dialogue guide, and it can be done by yourself, by your group. It can be guided by a pastor or a lay leader, or I can come and walk through it with you. It's a significant process. It takes at least a half a day, but it's clearly laid out and it has great resources. I can also do this presentation, which I just did for you. I can do for a congregation. And usually what has happened a couple times now has been I've been invited to preach, and I preach the gospel because that's love your neighbor. And then I do this presentation after the service. Get your pens and pencils ready, because the next slide is all the resources. The most important one is the one with the red arrow.
Actually, Sarah, could we have this emailed to us?
Yes.
Oh, thank you.
I'll send this slide to Bob so that he can get it to you guys.
Thank you.
The most important one is reconciliationcanada.ca. There's a lot of tools on there. The one you're looking for is the kitchen table talk. The ELCA has the Indigenous Ministries and Indigenous, what Advance call it? He just changed the name of it, so it's keeps changing on me. The ELCA has a lot of resources on there. And again, I encourage you to take Indian 101. And I encourage you to do it at your congregation if it's at all possible. And I'm going to leave this one up and take any questions and comments. So I did not teach you how to do a land acknowledgement. I taught you about interconnected relationships and why it's important for us to nurture our relationships with our Indigenous neighbors. Do we have any questions? I'm going to stop my share.
Several years ago, we had a lady that was in one of the motels in town, and she was semi-homeless.
Mhm.
And she asked for some help from the church. And we got her some material and got her involved with the clothes closet in town, in the food pantry. And I came in and asked her, or she asked me if I could say a prayer for her. And she was Native American. We talked about that. And I gave her a prayer, but then I asked her if she would give me a prayer.
Mhm.
And she gave me the prayer in Ojibwa, but then I asked her if she would send it to me. And I have that on my office.
Oh.
And I wish I had more. I don't share it as often as I should.
That's beautiful.
It's a beautiful prayer. And I feel bad that I don't share it more than I do.
Well, that brings me, that's a good connection though, is about the relationship that you built there between yourself and the lady. One of the reasons land acknowledgement is important is because the Native American tribes are in relationship with the earth as if it were a person. We have a very hard time with European heritage understanding that the earth is a living being that they are in relationship with. So a blessing is going to include the land. And that's what made me think of reinforcing. That's why land acknowledgement has become something that we are trying to do. It's a first step. It's like somebody acknowledging the creator for us. We acknowledge you have a creator.
This is Heidi. And I probably am totally confused about this. So what's the difference between reconciling in Christ and this land acknowledgement stuff? Is there a difference or is it the same thing?
The difference is reconciling in Christ was originally geared towards the LGBTQ plus community. It was a way of a congregation going through the process to discern if they could be open and accepting for anybody of any gender or orientation, and then going through the process of that discernment and coming up with a welcome statement for that. Reconciling in Christ has become slightly broader than that now because it is about open and welcoming, and it is more than the LGBTQ plus community, but it is still primarily the LGBTQ plus community. Land acknowledgement is specific to our Indigenous neighbors. So our cousins have had their land taken from us, usually by our church. Our church has imposed some heinous crimes on them. The Indian schools, usually run by the church, including the Lutheran Church, the removals and the forced adoptions, what was it? It's not the one that's kill the Indian, keep the man and kill the Indian. I can't remember that phrase right now off the top of my head. But
Yeah,
it was
save the man, kill the Indian.
That's
Yeah.
right. Save the man, kill the Indian. It's basically
Yeah.
forcing people to conform to our culture. There are a lot of places, and reconciling Christ is one that is open and affirming regardless of how well you conform to the culture or not. But land acknowledgement is specific, and it also it doesn't just acknowledge the harms that were done, but the fact that we continue to not recognize the history of them being done and the fact that it is still happening. Missing and murdered Indigenous women make up so much of the trafficking population that it is just horrific. So they're different. They have the same purpose. They have the same purpose of living in right relationship.
Okay, yeah, I was just wondering, because then there was a comment made at the beginning of the presentation, and I thought, maybe I'm not thinking of this right, but okay, I have it right. Thank you.
Yeah, no, my mandate is to live in right relationship with yourself, with your neighbors, and with God. This is a way of living in right relationship with a specific set of neighbors.
So Sarah, this might not be the right forum to ask this, and feel free to say, like, do this at a different location. But so about 5 years ago, I found out that a chief in the LC, the Lakota, which is in our backyard, basically, was murdered on either on my property or very close to my property in the late 1892, 93. And when I found this out, I was just very disturbed and to not have had that information. And I had wanted to, actually, I did reach out to a Native American that I was working with at the time. I shared this story, and not because I didn't have any expectations. I didn't know what to do with this like new information. And the gentleman, and I understand as far as I'm able why he responded the way he did, but he said to me in a very sneering tone of voice, "So you're trying to clean out your lily white soul?" And I was like, "No, I guess I'm just really disturbed by this, and I feel like it should be acknowledged, like it should be made known that this happened." And the three people who murdered him, they were put on trial. They shot him in the back, and they were all acquitted. Their claim was self-defense. How somebody can claim self-defense when they shoot somebody in the back? But of course, it was a jury by peers of all white men. So anyway, so what does a person do with that kind of information, and how do you move to, say, a reconciliation? So
my question would be, why would you include the tribe, the Lakota elders, in coming to terms with that murder?
okay, because I feel an injustice was done and it was swept under the carpet. And obviously this happened decades, well before my grandfather settled here. So it's not about me personally, but I feel like there was this heinous thing that happened, and it's not been acknowledged by the greater community. And
Or do you know if it was
like a retrial should be done. Pardon?
have the
What was
Lakota
that?
Ray
I
come
didn't
to
hear you.
peace- Have the Lakota Ray come to peace with it?
I don't know.
There's where you start.
I don't know. Okay.
Because what I'm hearing is that you, and I'm not being mean, okay, but
Mhm.
you, as a white property owning woman, feel that you should be allowed to bring this back up.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's hard, but it might be a place to start by going and asking someone in the tribe, ask for guidance. Say, I'm looking for someone to give me guidance. I would like to know if the tribe needs healing regarding the murder of this person. Because once again,
Okay,
it's very hard for us not to make it about us. But does the tribe need hearing?
right. And I
They-
don't, yeah,
Because if they're at peace with it, and they may or may not be, we don't know.
mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But this is the kind of really hard stuff that gets brought up in these things.
Yep. No,
That
I
is a
appreciate that.
perfectly-
And I have,
that is a
yeah,
perfectly
Yep.
appropriate question.
okay. No, thank you.
Of course.
That was interesting the way you put that. How
It
we automatically go from our perspective that we want to be cleansed or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
But if it's not an issue for them, then we're stepping on someone else's toes, trying to feel better.
And we don't know because we tend to not ask.
Yeah, and I actually did leave a message. I did try to reach out to somebody at there is a indigenous church, and I left a message and saying I'd like to talk to somebody, and I didn't reference what it was about. I just said there is this issue that I would like to talk to somebody about, and of course, and I don't know if I was expecting someone to call back, and someone else said I should just like what you mentioned earlier. You have to keep asking, and I have not done that, so
And the
that's
other
on
one,
me.
and the other one is the Kudere have a cultural liaison. And, to be blunt, they're used to talking to white people.
Is that Dr. Saint Germain?
I don't know.
Oh, okay. All right. I'll do some investigation. Thank you.
Yeah. But when you catch yourself using first person personal pronouns, give yourself a breath and ask, why am is this about me or is this about what they need? Because I know you want justice and that's a beautiful thing. But the thing is they may have already put justice into motion.
Right.
We may or may not recognize it.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Go ahead, Tom. No. Anything else?
Sarah, this is Lyle. I've got a question. I too don't know at what stage this should be brought up, but we're here now. And I've had this question in my mind. And I don't know how prominent this thought is out there, but I've heard it probably at least 3 times, either one time said to me, otherwise just in conversation around. And although it wasn't worded the same every time, it come down to, if we do this, one of the next steps is going to be we're going to lose our land. Well, our land, need to question that. Is that something we need to be prepared? And how would we deal with that? Because I can see that stopping a conversation in a group pretty fast.
So I can tell you how I have done this. Now, you need to understand that I used to work with lions. I'm not very much intimidated by humans. So somebody said that to me. If we start here, where's it going to stop? They're going to want the land back.
Yeah.
And my response was, what makes you think they want the land back? It's a poisoned gift that they have to pay taxes on. There was a church in Minnesota that tried to give the land back when the church closed. And the tribe said, no, that's not a gift. That's a tax liability. We don't want it back. If you want to do something good with it, create a environmentally sustainable park there instead, which of course they didn't. They sold it for money. But that's one of the things that we can say is that if we do this, they're going to want their land back. No, that's a Western way of thinking. And you can tell
Exactly.
them the story about the church that was asked to build an environmentally sustainable park and chose not to when the tribes refused to take the land, because they have to pay taxes on the land. And it's not connected to the reservation, and it doesn't do them. Had they built sustainable housing, that may have been different. Maybe what we say is that if we do this, we're going to lose the land, or if we do this, we're going to have to look at the land with different eyes. So yes, you are going to come up against that question. The other one is, if we start here, then it's going to be reparations next. That's another really big one that comes up. And when I lived in Australia, our church was the second church built in Melbourne, Australia. And we were working with the Wurundjeri tribe to pay rent. We were going to be paying a certain amount of money every month to the Wurundjeri elders. And because we were never going to give back the land, but we wanted to be, we wanted to acknowledge in a tangible way that the land had been stolen. Well, by the time I left 3 years later, they were still talking about it because the council could not let go of the idea that they had to know how the money was being spent. They were going to pay, it was paltry, $1,000 a month. They were going to pay $1,000 a month to the Wurundjeri tribe, and they said, but it has to go to education. And I would argue, once it's a gift given, we have no control over it. They could buy pizza if they wanted to. No, then we're not going to do it. If they're not going to use it for education, we're not going to do it. And my question every single month was, how is this not imposing our will? But education elevates people. Education gives them better, they had all the comments about education that are all very, very true in the Western world. That is not what was important to the tribe there. The tribe wanted to restore the lands that were being given back to them. And they were taking it. In Australia, they were taking the land. And people very quickly stopped doing that because they didn't want to lose the land and they didn't want to set a precedent. So the idea of what to do, the thing is if you are in relationship with the tribes in your area, if you say, we are doing a land acknowledgement, this is the first step, and it is about us recognizing what has happened to the land and happened to the tribes. And going forward, we want to work on relationship. Like I said, you can, offering language school is one of the biggest things you can do. Offering to pay for language school in some of the school districts. Black River Falls has Ashinabae taught in the school, but it's paid for by the tribe. The school district won't touch it. There are a lot of things you can do to be in relationship. And then when the time comes, if the time ever comes, for you to be talking about, well, then we have to give the land back, you'll already know. You'll already be in relationship with them because you'll already be able to say, no, what they would like us to do would be to create affordable housing. What they would like us to do is put in a park. You'll have that relationship established. And that's probably your biggest vaccination against the idea of we'll have to give it back. Well, that's us and them talk. We talk.
If I heard you right earlier, the indigenous approach to land isn't as a thing or a possession anyway, it's a relationship. So owning it really a part of the thought?
No. No, it is not. You could, it is, well, let me put it this way. They look at our agribusiness farms as slavery.
The
Yep.
land is enslaved. The
land
animals
is
are enslaved.
The animals, the land, it's all being enslaved, and badly.
Mm.
There's a scene in one of Louise Erdrich's book. It's called, the book name of the book is The Sentence, and there's this scene in the book that is illustrating what you're talking about. Long story short, there's this woman who comes into the bookstore, and she's talking about that she found in her aunt's stash of stuff this skeleton, and it's a Native American skeleton. And she's telling this story about, well, like it was used, blah 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 blah, and then the one of the women says, well, aren't you going to give it back, meaning give it back to the Native people? And she like totally ignores her and walks out of the store, and then she comes back again, and this story, it keeps the scene repeats itself a number of times, and then the woman finally brings the box into the bookstore, and she says, here you go. and and it's the whole thing. I mean, I'm not doing justice to the book. It's an excellent book, but that's what you're talking about, is finding out what exactly do they want. Because it's not about us, it's about them. And I don't mean it. This is their space. This is their land. This is their skeleton.
So one of the ways that I tie this, and this may help you in your conversations in your congregations, is if you are a landowner that is very concerned for creation, you're going to create an ecosystem that is habitat. And it's going to be habitat for native plants, which brings in the birds and the bees, which brings in the native fauna. It is going to be a space that you care for in a way that is true stewardship. If we are to look to our churches and our relationships with our Indigenous neighbors in the same way, we have to think about creating that habitat, that environment where we can all grow together in a long-term, sustainable future way that brings balance. We are so out of balance. When we want to talk about creation or justice or any of the Indigenous issues, I got them all. Got a whole binder's worth of stuff that I can talk about in balance. But if we approach land acknowledgement in the same way we would approach care of creation, putting in a rain garden or a permeable parking lot, this is the same kind of idea. It's always little steps. When you start in your garden, you don't start by tearing everything out and beginning afresh. You do it in baby steps. And then you watch that grow and flourish. And sometimes you do it and you have to try again. Something doesn't like that spot in the sun. It needs a spot over there in the half shade. Same idea. We have to try, and we have to keep trying. And our purpose is to right the relationship, a relationship that was broken badly and whose trust is gone. We are the abuser in this relationship.
And that's true for the land and for the people.
Yeah. And that's a hard thing to hear. The congregations rebel against this little tiny step because that's a horrible thing to hear.
I'm trying to figure out how what you just said and the fact that we've been working on turning our little bit of property here gradually away from grass to flowers and eventually to more native species. And how does that same process translate to our relationships with people?
Yeah. Oops. Sorry. I did not disappear. I'm here. Yeah, and it's a difficult, like I said, it takes humility. It takes a lot of practice and a lot of repeat. And frankly, it takes confession and forgiveness, and then we get up and we love our neighbors and keep doing it.
And it takes time. I think I'm thinking in terms of one of the things I like about the SAM program is that SAMs typically come out of the congregation. They have already an established relationship very often with the congregation, and they're likely to stay for a long period of time. Whereas the ordained minister pattern has been to come for a few years and then move on to bigger and better things. And that so that SAMs really have a kind of unique position to be able to help with these sort of matters because they're likely to stay long enough to bear fruit.
I don't know about the rest of you, but for me, it's not that we don't have, or I don't have questions. Yeah, my mind is going so wild, so fast that it's going to take a while to digest.
Absolutely. And so at this point, what I would like you to do is you don't have to answer out loud, but I would like each of you to think about one thing that you now know after this presentation that you did not know at the beginning of this conversation. And this is a grounding tool that's it's a very good way to sort of recenter. So one thing you know that you did not know when you began. Now, what is one thing you think that you didn't think before? So for instance, I might know that there were 41 million Native Americans in Turtle Island before 1491. But now I think that I need to look a little more deeply at where they were located. So that's not a thing I know, that's something I'm thinking about. And then lastly, what is one thing you feel now at the end of this meeting that you did not feel at the beginning? And it might be a physical feel. I feel my heart racing, my head pounding, I'm sweating, something. Or it might be an emotional feel. Might even be a spiritual feel. But think, know, feel are very good ways of helping you bring those questions into focus. Because sometimes they all pertain to the same thing. And then you can see what it is that the Spirit's nudging you towards.
Sarah, I feel a great sense of gratitude for your presence and your presentation, and I also feel hope. I think I have a much clearer pathway of how to begin this process in my community. So thank you.
You're welcome. And I am available. I will include my little calling card thing on when I send Bob the link to the resources. Ignore the first one. That's just the Bible verses I Googled. But I will include my information. I'm a resource that I can, while I shared the resources that I think are most relevant to congregations, I'm always happy to answer questions, to talk. I do a lot of back and forth emails, people going, but now what? And that's fine. I don't mind. Bob, you might want to stop recording, or did you already?
I'm still recording. I can stop now if you think we're ready.
I think that's probably good timing.
Okay. I've got something overlaying the part of the screen.